gotta do that. Yeah, okay, I guess I'm gonna do that on TikTok. All right. We're gonna start in 3 minutes, a little bit early, because I'm trying to figure out how all this stuff works. This is my first rodeo with it, so. Testing this other thing. Oh yeah, we'll go to movies. Testing. Looks good. Test. Sweet. All right, cool. That works. Record this. Cool. All right, cool. I'll get started, and as people show up, I can answer any live questions. But for this one, we'll start with the one that was asked around how do you make sure you're not getting totally wrecked with taxes is one, and another person had asked how do I say, like, how much, let me see if I can find it. Yeah, pretty much how much to charge. So we'll start there. So let's go over the taxing first. So before I begin this, I'm going to do the obligatory. I'm not a tax expert. I'm just a guy who started his own businesses a couple times. None of them have been astronomically big, but they made a decent amount of change for me. So I know more than a person who hasn't done it before. So let's start yeah, let's start with this taxes question. If I might need the whiteboard. So the question, and I'll read it out, was let me see if I can find it here. As somebody begins to make income off of freelancing, how do they make sure they don't make the tax man mad? And the reason for this question was in the past, this individual had seen YouTubers starting to make income and then get heavily surprised by taxes. And obviously, they don't want that to happen to them. So let's start with, and I'm going to generalize this. So I may not use like the appropriate jargon for this, but my intent is that you get the principle of this all down. So let's start with the general, like if I had to put a figure on it, I'd say put like 30, maybe 40% aside. Leave it at that. And this is why that number. So I'm going to use my whiteboard as, if anybody's watched my videos, I go to this thing a lot. So if I had to explain this concept, it's easier to do so starting with if you were just a standard employee working for somebody else. So when you're working for somebody else, let's say this is you, right? And you are an employee of, we'll say Epic Games, right? So they got like the little shield thing going on. I'll just put E. Okay. So you're an employee under Epic. And what this means, and I mean an employee, not a contractor, not a freelancer, but they have hired you, they're providing you benefits there, like you're actually on their payroll. So they have to pay an employment tax. I'm not sure if there's another word for it, but pretty much you have the IRS, right? Internal Revenue Service or something like that. That's the tax man. And Epic has to pay a tax to them for employing you. And then you have to pay a tax to the IRS. Now, how much you pay is dependent when you fill out this thing called a W-2. And that W-2, asks you questions like, do you have any dependents, things like that? Do you want any extra tax withheld? And that's pretty much it. And then it also goes off of how much your salary or hourly wage is. So I'm just going to assume baseline salary is like, this is an annual. It doesn't matter if you work more or less, you get paid this much amount. There is no overtime in salary. Hourly is you're getting paid $30 an hour. So every hour that you are logged, you're getting paid $30, right? And that's dictated by the employment agreement that you had signed with Epic Games when you first got employed. And why this number is important is depending on what that is, it's going to determine how much you make per year. So your salary or hourly determines your annual income, and that's going to put you in a tax bracket, okay? So let me just put Epic does your employment tax, and then so what that means is your employment tax plus your annual income and then whatever you put on your W-2 are the three things that determine how much the IRS gets, right? I know my drawings don't make any sense. I just kind of have to like draw things as I speak them out, so bear with me. Cool. So then what happens when you're a contractor or you're self-employed or you're a freelancer? Well, then you fill out a thing called a 1099, right? So that's like the contractor version of a W-2 or the self-employment version of a W-2. And the difference now is if you are a freelancer, you are essentially an employee of yourself. It's kind of weird, right? But what that means is you pay the employment tax and you pay whatever you list on your 1099, which, like your W-2, determines if you want any extra tax withheld, any money withheld. I'll get into what withholding means, by the way, because people may not be familiar with that. And then whatever your projected annual income is, what your actual annual income is, right? So and that gets sent to the IRS. So this means two things. One, the employment tax, I believe, is 15.3%. So let's say you make, let's put this into a real world scenario, right? Let's say at the end of the year, in both these scenarios, you make 100K, just for the sake of math. Okay, make $100,000. Epic is already paying that employment tax, and I'm not sure. No, they do take it out. Yeah. So they should be taking that out. Actually, let me see. I'm gonna have to Google this. I'm not sure if they take it out or if they actually cover it. Either way, you don't feel it because it's not you. Does your employer pay your employment tax from your paycheck? Okay, yeah, so they do deduct it. Cool. At least in Virginia, that's how is how it happens. Or employment training tax is withheld. Okay. Yeah, actually, let's go to the IRS. Employment was deposited. All right. Well, then, according to the IRS, some of it is paid by the employer, and some of it's paid by just by you. Great. Cool. So, quick Google search on the IRS will tell you these things. But in short, you're not going to see that employment tax when you're working for somebody else. So, like, the employer, before you get your paycheck, is going to say, okay, we're going to take 15.3% out for employment. And then whatever your tax bracket is, so how tax brackets work, I believe. And let me actually see what the tax brackets are in 2025 right now, so we can get an accurate. Okay. So your tax bracket depends if you're single, married, whatever. We're just going to do single because it's easier this way. So if you're single, you're the first approximately $12,000 for the 2025 federal. So you have federal and state taxes, right? The first $12,000 you make, they're going to tax at 10%. Then from that $12,000 to about $48,000, they're going to tax at 12%. From 48 to 103, they tax at 22, and then from 103 to like 200, they tax at 24. So like if you're making 200 or $180,000, you're not just going to be taxed 20% of it. It kind of like steps up, right? So we're not going to get into all that right now. Let's just say you make 100 grand. So that's an extra 15% that they're taking out. And then let's see. So I live in Virginia. It's saying about 5.75, so we'll take 6% out of that. So the state is minus 6%, okay? So for 100K, you take 15.3 plus 15 plus 6. That puts you at minus 36.3% of taxes that's taken out. So if you make $100,000, your gross payment, so gross, we're going to use this word, right? Gross is like everything you get in pre-tax. So like when you get hired and I say, this is your salary. Oop, I pressed my button. I have one of those electronic desks, those standing desks. There you go. So when they say, hey, we're signing you on, you're gonna make $100,000 a year, that's your gross. You're actually not gonna see that. What you're actually gonna see is closer to whatever 100,000 minus $36,300 is, which would be 63.7. That seems a little low, but whatever. You get the point. Double check with somebody who knows more exactly about what you're going to get. But this is the principle, right? Employment tax, federal tax, state tax comes together, it gets taken out of your paycheck. What's left over is what you get. Now, what's cool about this is when you sign your W-2, or there's also a W-4, when you sign one of these forms, I know I'm being really confusing. Like I said, I'm not a tax expert, but principles. When you sign one of these fancy papers and you say, this is how much like I want withheld, if anything, I'm still going to tell you what withholding is. If you don't have anything withheld, what's going to happen is this automatically gets taken out of your paycheck. Done. So if you're making $100,000 a year, which is what, like 8.5, what's 100 divided by 12? Let me see. All right. So your gross every month, if you're making 100K, is going to be 8.3K. However, what you're actually going to get on your monthly paycheck would be closer, assuming this number is actually right, which this is your net. I'm sorry. This is your gross. That's your net. That's going to be closer to 5.3K. So in reality, you get 5.3K per month to spend. Okay, so that's that. Now, getting to the 1099. Here's why people get screwed. Your employer takes care of this. When you're a 1099, you have to take care of this. So let's say you're making $100,000 a year and you don't put any of it away for taxes. You're just like, hey, this is my money. I made it. Cool. So you're not putting away your employment tax, your 1099, and anything measured by your annual income. Nothing. At the end of the year, the IRS can look at your bank account and be like, wow, obviously made a lot of money. Cool. And they're going to be like, but there's $100,000 and we didn't get our cut of it. So then they send you a bill at the end of the year. That's why that person got hit, because their employer didn't take care of it when it was their responsibility. So how do you avoid this? Well, again, go on IRS. There's online calculators. Or if you want to just start off, like I said, I think 63.7 is a bit low, to be honest. I think I got my math wrong on it, but you get the idea. But put away 30, 40% of whatever you make. So if you get $100 for a job, 50 of that should go in a separate bank account, and that should just be used for taxes. And then you actually get to use the remaining $50 of that. That's it. That's how you avoid it. So now here's the really cool thing about this, though. There is a positive. So first of all, as I promised, before I get into the positives, withholding. So withholding basically says I want to keep more of my paycheck and not pay it to taxes right now. And sometimes depending if like you have a special need or a disability or something to where the government's like, okay, you can keep a little bit extra and we won't come after you for it. That's great. But the tricky part is you can still ask for it and get it without having that need, but then you're going to have to pay it at the end of the year. So basically, like the reason why that guy on YouTube got screwed for a huge bill at the end is they unintentionally pretty much took their entire salary or their entire wage and withheld it from the government, and then they had to pay it back. So keep that in mind. Now, the good news with that, you can write things off. Okay. So let's say you're a freelancer and you make music and you decide that you're going to buy this like really nice fancy laptop, like a $10,000 laptop. Why not? We'll call it that. And you write that and you say, I'm only using this for business. If you can write that off at the end of the year. So what that means when you write something off is you say, hey, I made 100 grand, but my laptop was 10 grand. I use that because I need it for my business. I am going to freak out with this desk. What that means is they're only going to tax you on $90,000 of your income, not $10,000. Likewise, if you have a retirement account, a traditional retirement account, so you may have heard like Roths and traditional IRAs. A traditional IRA means they don't tax that. So if you take $10,000 of your money that year, so let's say you make $100,000 and 10,000 you use to buy a computer, and then you take another 10K, and that goes into a traditional IRA. Now they're only taxing you 80%. So that's why when you fill those things out and you actually do that stuff, you can get a pretty big tax break, like a check back at the end of the year. There's a catch with that traditional IRA, by the way, which is when you take it out, so you're retired, you then have to pay the taxes on that. Whereas a Roth is you pay the taxes now, so you don't get a tax break, but when you take it out when you retire, you don't have to pay it. So if you expect to be pretty filthy, stinking rich, or at least richer than you are now, consider using a Roth. If you need a little break on taxes this year and you're okay with paying them later on, do traditional. So there's that. Cool. So yeah, in short, put 30 to 40% away for taxes, and you are responsible for paying employment tax and your own federal and state taxes. That's that. Sweet. Next question. Oh, also really quick, I wanted to shout out. So someone in our community, Tara had mentioned that that account that you put your taxes in, she recommended using a high yield savings account so the money works for you throughout the year. So basically what that is, a high yield savings account, there's interest, right? So most savings account, if you put money in, they might give you like 0.5% interest or something like really minuscule, meaning throughout the year, if you put $1,000 in, you would make $5 for having your money in the bank account. If, however, you have a high yield savings account, which may yield you like 4%, well, now you made $40 throughout the year, which still isn't crazy, but think about if you start kind of building like a little tax, bank account and you add a little bit to that. Let's say you eventually get to 10 grand. Well, that's $400 per year that now you don't have to pay to the tax person, right? And for a lot of folks, like that might actually cover their taxes if they're, not too big. So yeah, by leveraging the power of interest and, being smart and disciplined with your money and not hoarding everything right out of the gate, you may actually put yourself in a place where you don't really have to pay that much in taxes if you have to pay at all. And if you play it right, you might even get money back, which is cool. Oh, and that's the last thing, right? So again, if you don't pay anything, if you're in a deficit, so even if you like don't pay enough, even as a W-2 employee, you'll have to pay at the end of the year. If you pay too much, you should, keyword should, get a paycheck back from the IRS. Ideally, try to get as close to zero of what you owe as possible, because the IRS, like, they're going to try to get their cheese, and they may not pay you as much as you actually deserve. So another reason why it's also good to hire a tax professional, because you might actually end up getting more back than it costs to hire that individual. All right, I'm done with that. So next, the money question. How much should I charge? So the question is, let's see. And I'll do one more, which is forming a proper business entity, so like an LLC. But that one's pretty easy, so I'll say that one for the end. Okay, so I'll preface this by saying I don't have that much experience yet charging for music. I've always like I've done audiobooks, or I've done speaking gigs, or I've done consulting and things like that. But I feel the principles are going to be pretty the same. And as I start charging for music, I'm going to see how well those principles work. So there's two ways that I can think of, and I actually learned of something really cool later today by Jason Graves, who is a really big composer. And that's essentially like you either go flat rate or hourly. And there's pros and cons to each. I personally would go with flat rate, because if you get really good at what you do and you can finish songs faster, then like again, you're charging for the value that you provide, not necessarily how much you work. And I know this is like a big concept, and I really should get more into like the philosophy of why you should charge, how much you should charge. But let me just do a mental exercise for anybody who's watching this, especially if you're a creative. And hopefully you don't know any code for this analogy. So let's say you want to build an app, like a customized app, and you find a developer and you say, hey, I need you to build this app. And they come back to you and they say, all right, cool. It's going to cost you, I don't know, say $10,000 to do so for a fresh app. Now, whether or not you can afford that right now is besides the question. But as you hear the answer to that, you're probably just like, that makes sense. That makes sense that they're charging for that, because I don't know how to do that. And they're really good at what they do. And so when they say it's going to cost $10,000 for this, it makes sense, right? Okay. Switch places, because not everybody can compose music. Just like not everybody can code. And that's why you should be charging. Okay. So like don't undervalue yourself, because you've put time and effort into this, and it's a craft just like anything else is. So then the question is, well, like, how do you figure how much you should charge? And the bigger question is, how do you accept that payment? Maybe I'll get into that. So how much did you charge? It's not too crazy. And I'll preface this by saying, generally, a business should be more robust than what I'm about to show you. like diversifying what you do instead of just composing. Because let me ask you, do you I mean, some people do. I'm not the type of person that wants to compose for like 8 hours a day and that's all that I do, right? So factor in other things here. But we'll just do a hypothetical scenario. So let's start with you want to make $100,000 per year. Work backwards. And how can you find this number? Like, go online and see how much people are making with a similar skill set. Like, if I'm just like, hey, how much? If I go online and I say, how much do game composers make? Indeed is saying an average salary of $52,250 a year. Um, Personally, I'd be trying to shoot for higher than that. So some people are saying 60 to 75. That sounds good. So like, I mean, it's going to depend on where you live and things like that. But look at like what's the median salary of where you live, right? Um, how much do people make in a similar field for similar experience? And what's really cool about that is you'll probably get a range of saying, hey, based on, you know, we're going to use 100K anyway, just as for the example. But for now, let's just like hash out these variables. So how much do other composers make? How much is a pay difference between like layers of skill level? What's the cost of living in your area? And things like that. So for instance, let's say you live in Los Angeles. And in Los Angeles, the cost of living is, I don't know, like 2 times higher than the average, right? And so if you can find an average salary for a game composer, and we'll say it's $50,000, you say, well, cool, it's $50,000 in the United States, but I live in Los Angeles, so I should be making $100,000, right? So like all those different variables, and you'll probably see like varying degrees of how much people are making. Basically, what I'm getting at is if you see anywhere between like $50,000 to $100,000, and you can say, well, I live in a higher cost of living area, so $100,000, or I live in a lower cost of living area, so I want to, maybe charge but still want to have like a higher quality of life, and I'm doing work with people who live in higher cost of living areas, leverage that. There's nothing wrong with it, but if you're brand spanking new to this and you're like, oh, game composers make $50,000, don't go out there and try to pull in a $200,000 salary for yourself. Or with that being your only means of composing, because you'll probably be asking maybe for too much. You just don't want to ask for too little. You want to be fair, and you want to be upfront. So that said, let's just go with you've decided, you've pulled these numbers together. You said, okay, I think 100 grand for my skill level and what I can contribute and my cost of living and all these variables together, I think is fair. Again, don't sell yourself short. It's okay to like ask for more than you think. Just be fair, right? So you want to make 100K. Okay. So now you ask yourself, well, how much do I want to work? And a general rule, I think this is a little tight, but we'll say is I divide that number by 2,000. So that assumes you're working for 50 weeks for 40 hours a week. That makes sense. And maybe you want 3 weeks of vacation or 4 weeks of vacation, and then you would do it by whatever 40 times 48 is, right? But let's just do 100K divided by 2K. And so that gives you not 50K. Your hourly rate now is $50 an hour. Now, as you do more work and you get a better idea of like, oh, somebody's asking for a 1-minute theme song, and it's probably going to take me 4 hours to write. then when somebody asks you like, hey, I'd like a 1-minute theme song, all right, well, at $50 an hour for 4 hours, I should be charging at least $200 for that, right? 4 hours, cool. That's so much. Okay, but there's other factors at play. Because if you remember the tax thing, if you write that song and you make that $200, there's a problem. The problem is that you're actually not going to see all of that money. So then you have to ask, well, when I chose $100,000 as my living salary, did I choose that knowing that I had to take taxes out? And if you did, great. Then this already works. You don't have to worry about anything because you know that you're really only going to be seeing around 25 bucks of that or $30 of it. But if you didn't and this number is too low, well, then you have to consider, hey, I have to multiply this times, 1.4 for tax purposes. And then you also have to think about your expenses. So did they require session musicians? Do they want live recordings? Did you have to hire out a studio? Did you have to buy new software? Did you have to like all of these things? And I'll make like a little chart to kind of make this easier. But let's say you had dude, I wish I could turn this off. So let's say 200 your base that you found. So this is just your labor. This is labor and skill. Your tax is what's going to be $80 out of this, you estimate. Let's say you had to buy a new VST, and that cost you $50, and you'll say, well, I estimate that I may have to use this VST 4 times this year. We'll say 5 times for the sake of math. So maybe you choose to break that down, so you'll call it software. So again, it's a $50 VST, and you expect that you may be using it 5 times this year. Maybe you had to hire a live musician, and their rate was, $200. And then you also had to hire studio space, which was $100. Okay. Well, now that piece of music that you made is zero, 9, 10, 12. I'm sorry, I lied. 90, 2, 4. All right. So now that 1 hour or that 1 minute song is $590. Now, if you look online, people are saying, like, generally speaking, you want to charge between $100 to $400, something like that, if you're just starting for a minute of music. And so if you go back to, maybe to your client, they're like, oh, that seems a little bit high. You can say, well, you could cut down on this by, maybe we don't do a live musician. And if so, because you have this, kind of pulled out, you can say, we could actually get this down closer to $300, in which they'd be like, okay, that sounds good, right? So that's one of the things I want to highlight is, at least for me, when I was like in art school and like doing things, I didn't consider all the materials and the other things I need, like equipment rentals, because I did like 3D modeling, so I had to get like software and everything. And so I was actually eating a lot of costs because I just thought about how much my hourly would be. So I was actually working in the red. So you can break these things out depending on what they want and price them out. And then if you go to the negotiating table, you say, hey, based on everything that you want, this is how much it's going to be. And if they're like, oh, that's a little expensive, you can start having a more informed conversation saying, well, like, hey, here's where you can cut costs without cutting into your pocket, right? Because you can still write this without the studio and the live musicians, and still make all of your labor and cover your taxes and any software that you might need to buy for this project. Does that make sense? Cool. And then at the end, right, this $200 is now going to your salary. The rest of this is going to your business, which, by the way, you can write that off at the end of the year. So if you need to hire all these folks, or if you need to buy that software, you can write that off as an expense. Cool. So yeah, that's how you price yourself. Now, the tip that Jason had made, which I really liked, is sometimes, you go to studios and they don't really have a budget. And then the question is, well, do you work for free? And what I would say to that, or what he said to that, which I really love, is you should be writing this contract with your full price. You should be valuing your music right out of the gate. Never work for free. But if they don't have the money to pay you, give them a 100% discount or 70% discount, depending on what their budget is. Because then when they see that paper and they're like, all right, well, wow, I'm actually getting a discount. This is how much this person charges. Should they hire you again, they already know what your rate is, right? It's no longer this ambiguous, like, oh, maybe they won't charge. It's no, they do charge. They were just doing me a solid and I know how much they charge. And that's a much different conversation. You're setting a precedent. So there's that. So yes, that's how much to charge is basically, that little model I said. Another way to think about this is you have expenses for everything. Labor is an expense, right? There's two types of expenses. You have fixed expenses and you have variable expenses. So a fixed expense is, again, like what you want to get paid. New VSTs, like things like that. A variable expense is, hiring a musician, renting a studio, things like that. So now what you can do is when you add up all your fixed expenses, you say it's going to be at least this. And then for your variable expenses, and also depending on how long this is going to take, if you want just a quick lick from a session musician, you're only going to have to deal with 1 hour. If you want a full orchestration, it's going to be like 10 hours, right? So you can then go and be like, hey, this is going to be at least this much. And depending on how much extra you want on that, then you can start tacking on the variable expenses and start giving them a proper range. So at the end of the day, that's a good way to break it down is when pricing, you're not sure how much to charge, think fixed and think variable expenses. Cool. Last bit is forming a business entity. So how do you make an LLC? It's super easy. Literally just go to your state, type in, so let's say Virginia LLC application. Do it on Google. There'll be some sort of state corporate commission, an SEC. It may be something different. And then most of them will have just a file online. You pay anywhere from $100 to $200, depending on the state, give or take. And then you're done. That's it. They file it for you. They give you an EID, which is essentially an employer identification. It's like your business's social security. And then you can take that and actually open up a banking checking account, right? Because when you go to the bank, they ask you, hey, what's your name? What's your SSN? They do the same thing with the business, except they're going to ask for your EID. That's it. And then with that, there's a bunch of different, what should you open up? In general, unless you're a nonprofit or you already have a bunch of people together, just open up an LLC and you probably just need a sole proprietorship or an S corp. That's it. And really a sole proprietorship. So what that does as a sole proprietorship is normally with an LLC and most forms of those businesses, it requires you to have like a board and to file your business's taxes separately. As a sole proprietorship, you're it. So you can pretty well, you file your business's taxes and income along with your own. Um, Basically, it makes tax season a whole lot less confusing. So, sole proprietorship. It doesn't have as many protections as the other ones, but again, if you're just starting out and trying to, get your feet wet, um, one second. I have somebody who's potentially wants to hop on. Anyway, yeah, so like you probably don't have as big of a target on your back as you need to. Like, you really don't need that much crazy stuff. I'll be honest. So, and then with that, you'll need to get like an articles of incorporation, things like that. Here's what I would do. Again, I'm not a legal expert, so take this with a grain of salt. But unless you're pulling in like crazy buku money and have a large target on your back, you can get pretty far with this until you actually get your feet underneath you to where you don't have to spend a lot of money on lawyers and things like that. Look up, yeah, your state will probably tell you like, hey, you need to make sure you have articles of incorporation and like all these different paperworks. Go on ChatGPT, say my business is going to be called this, and I need you to write, and it does this type of work, and I need you to write articles of incorporation. Copy, paste, do a quick proofread. Like a lot of times, it's not complicated legalese, and just make sure that it makes sense, and do that for each of those little doodads, and you're good. That's literally what LegalZoom does. Right? A lot of people start businesses on LegalZoom and they'll pay them like $400-$500. Don't do it. It's really is a total waste of money, I think. They're just giving you templates, and you can find those templates online for free. And you can have ChatGPT write them for you. So there you go. So go online, figure out what papers you need, ChatGPT those papers, fill out the application, boom. You're done. You have your EID, and then you can go ahead and open up a business checking account. The last thing I want to add to that is you can file for these things called DBAs. So DBA is doing business as. Basically, it's saying like if you want to name like my business for this is actually called Dogbeard Studios, and that's another story for another day. But I named this company after the best dog in the entire world, But Arpeggio, like I don't have an LLC called Arpeggio, RPGIO. I do have a DBA. So I can keep that name. I can register it for my business, and I'm legally allowed to now do business under Arpeggio without having to open up a separate business entity. So again, if you're just like, oh, what do I name it? I want to name it all these crazy things. I have this thing. Like, don't worry about that. Open an LLC with a name that you like. And if you find something that, is you want to name your business as later on, file a DBA. In Virginia, they're like $10. They're really cheap. So it's, again, that part of it isn't that hard. And once you do it once, you're going to be like, oh, that's nothing. And I highly recommend you do it because you can write off a lot of stuff under your business. And again, that helps a lot at tax season, a lot. So pay the $100, $200 now. I've been fortunate enough to get like thousands of dollars back during tax season because I have an LLC and I can write things off as legitimate business expenses. New laptops, BSTs, all sorts of things that I spend my money on for my business to help it grow. Because I have an LLC, I am allowed to write those things off, and I see a lot of that come back in the next year. So cool. That's all I got. We're just shy of 50 minutes. If you're watching this, thank you for your patience. And if you are not a part of Arpeggio, please join. It's RPGIO. We're a Discord group. We teach music. We have skill shares. We do game jams. And eventually we're going to be having paid work for people. That's the ultimate goal, is to get people the ability to put food on their table. So thanks for joining. I'll see you guys around. Peace. If I knew how to exit this. Oh my gosh.